Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip back in time. Way back, we're going to explore what a single day was actually like for the average person in what we call the Dark Ages. Turns out it was less about noble knights and grand castles, and more about just trying to survive until sunset. Imagine waking up, not to an alarm but to the smell of mud, animal waste and stale smoke. You're in a dark, windowless hut that you share with your family and probably your livestock. The year is around 650 AD. You didn't oversleep, you just survived the night, which is your first victory of the day. For breakfast, forget your coffee. You're getting a chunk of gritty, stale bread and some weak ale, because the local water is more likely to kill you than anything else. Your schedule for the next 14 hours is just back-breaking labour in a field. Not for you, but for a lord you've probably never even seen. Think your modern brain gives you an edge. It doesn't. Here, your knowledge of science or politics is useless. You aren't a hero waiting to be discovered. You're a peasant. You're one of the vast majority. And you probably wouldn't last a day. Your day starts in the cold and the dark, maybe around 3 a.m. in the summer. The only clock you have is the sun. You peel yourself off a straw-stuffed sack on a packed earth floor. And that scratching you feel? That isn't just the straw. It's the fleas and lice, who are pretty much your permanent roommates. The air is thick. It's a mix of smoke from the central fire pit that has no chimney, the damp smell of the walls and the very distinct aroma of the cow that slept inside with you for warmth. There's no bathroom, there's no sink. Hygiene as we know it doesn't really exist. Your morning routine is a quick splash of freezing water on your face from a wooden bowl. You might rub your teeth with a twig if you're feeling ambitious. But a full bath, that's a huge ordeal of hauling and heating water, a luxury you might experience once or twice in your entire life. For the most part, you just carry the grime of your world on your skin. Now for breakfast. Your first meal is all about fuel. You'll get a hunk of coarse dark bread, probably made from barley, so dense it feels like it could wear your teeth down. To wash it down, you have ale. Everyone drinks it, even the children. It's not for fun, it's a survival tactic. The local river is often contaminated with things you don't want to think about, a breeding ground for diseases that don't have names yet. Since the ale is boiled when it's made, it's one of the safer things to drink. You don't enjoy this meal, you eat it fast. Because the real day, a day of unrelenting work, is about to begin. As soon as there's a hint of light, you're out in the fields. And this is where your 21st century knowledge becomes completely useless. You can understand crop rotation all you want, but you have no power to change anything. You are, for all practical purposes, bound to the land. You can't just leave the manor without the Lord's permission, which is almost never given. If you run, you become an outlaw, with no protection, and you'll likely be captured and punished. The system you're living in is a kind of early version of what would later become feudalism. It's a rigid pyramid where you're stuck at the very bottom. You work the land, and in exchange, the lord and his soldiers are supposed to protect you from bandits. But the price for that protection is your freedom. For 2 or 3 days a week, more during the harvest, you're not working for yourself. You're doing what was called weak work, which is just a nice term for forced unpaid labour on the Lord's private lands. It's not a job, it's an obligation. It's how you pay rent, in sweat. You might spend the morning pushing a heavy plough through dense rocky soil. Or maybe you're cutting wheat with a small sickle, a repetitive back-breaking motion you'll do from sunrise to sunset. There are no sick days. If you get injured, you might not eat. And trying to suggest a better way of doing things, telling the Lord's manager about a more efficient plough design, that could be seen as disrespect. In a world where talking back can get you whipped, innovation is a dangerous game. You're not here to think, you're here to work. When the sun is at its highest, the work might pause for a few minutes. There's no lunch break. You eat right there, in the field. Your midday meal is pretty much a repeat of breakfast. More tough bread, maybe some more ale. If you're lucky, you might have some pottage. This was the staple food. It was a thin, watery stew that was always simmering over the fire at home. Whatever was available went into it. Oats, barley, onions, cabbage. Meat was a rare luxury, save for a feast day or the middle of winter. The constant threat in your life isn't just exhaustion, it's starvation. A single bad harvest from a drought or a flood could mean famine for everyone. But even when there is food, it's a gamble. Without refrigeration, food poisoning is common. Your bread might be contaminated with ergot, a fungus that grows on rye that can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and a gangrenous condition they called St. Anthony's fire. Every meal is a roll of the dice. You eat not for pleasure, but just to get enough energy to finish the last 7 or 8 hours of labour. As you work, you're always aware of your place. You were born into this life, and your children will be too, legally tied to this same piece of land. Even your personal life isn't your own. If you want to get married, you need the Lord's permission and you have to pay him a fee for it. This wasn't about romance. It was about the Lord managing his workforce. Now let's talk about what happens if you step out of line. There's no police force. If a crime happened, someone would raise the hue and cry, and it was everyone's duty to stop and chase the suspect. Justice was swift, public, and brutal. It was designed to punish, but also to terrify everyone else into obedience. Imagine you're caught stealing bread. You might be put in the stocks or a pillory in the town square, where people would throw rotten food and stones at you for hours. For more serious crimes, the process of proving guilt was an ordeal in itself, literally. It was called trial by ordeal, based on the idea that God would show who was guilty. In the ordeal by fire, you'd have to carry a red-hot bar of iron. They'd bandage your hand, and if it healed cleanly in 3 days, you were innocent. If it got infected, you were guilty. Even stranger was the ordeal by water. You'd be tied up and thrown into a river. The logic was twisted. Since water was pure, it would reject a sinner. So if you floated, you were guilty and would be executed. If you sank, you were innocent. Of course, you were probably also dead. It was a system where your life was worth less than the crops in the field. So let's say you've survived the work, the food, and the justice system. Now you face the final challenge, your own body. Life was fragile. Things we consider minor today were death sentences. A simple infection, a broken bone, or a fever could easily kill you. If you got sick, your first step was probably prayer. Sickness was often seen as a punishment from God. If that didn't work, you might see a local healer or a barber surgeon, and their cures would seem like something from a horror movie. Medieval medicine was based on the ancient idea of the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was an imbalance of these things. The most common solution for almost everything? Bloodletting. They'd cut you or use leeches to drain the excess blood. You were literally being drained of life in an attempt to save it. And it gets stranger. Suffer from bad headaches? The cure might be trepanation, drilling a hole in your skull to let the evil spirits out. While some of the truly bizarre stuff, like using ground-up mummies for medicine, would get more popular in later centuries, the foundations of horror were already there. Surgeons didn't understand germs. They might clean a wound with wine, but they thought pus was a good sign, the body pushing out toxins. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous. Hospitals were more like places for the poor to die with a little comfort, not to get treatment. Your body was a complete mystery, and the attempts to fix it were often deadlier than the disease. So the sun finally sets. You've survived. You walk home from the fields, your muscles screaming. You eat another small meal of pottage and bread. You're covered in a day's worth of dirt and sweat, and you live with a constant low-level fear of hunger, sickness, and your Lord's power. Your modern mind was useless. You couldn't invent a better world or argue your way to freedom. You were just trapped. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine ourselves as knights. But for the vast majority of people, this was reality. A life of hardship, obedience, and an early death. It's also true that many historians think the term Dark Ages is too simple. It was also a time of change and development. But for the person living it, day to day, life was probably pretty dim. So after a day like that, what do you think? Would you have survived? Let me know in the comments below. And as you do, maybe take a second to appreciate the world around you, the clean water from your tap, the food in your fridge, and the simple freedom to live a life of your own choosing. Because in the long story of humanity, these things are a fragile and precious miracle.